Welcome to SF Commercial Property Conversations with Bruce Bean, where Bay Area investments meet expert insights. Get ready to unlock the strategies of commercial real estate success.
So I'm delighted to be talking to Efrat Kasnik today. She is the president of Foresight Valuation Group, and it's wonderful to have you, Efrat. I'd just like to kind of start out our conversation by talking with you about kind of your journey from starting in Israel, actually, and moving to the US and how you got into this whole business.
Thank you, Bruce. Thank you for having me. I came to the US for graduate studies at UC Berkeley at the Haas School of Business. I came with an accounting degree from Israel, and I pursued an MBA here in the US. From there, I continued into an area of consulting called litigation consulting. So that was my first job out of business school. And that's doing a lot of economic work around damages, forensic work around legal disputes. Through that route, I got exposed to intellectual property lawsuits, which started showing up kind of in the late 90s, early 2000s. And that I made a segue in my career to stayed in consulting, but moved into intellectual property, which I call IP. So I'm going to use that acronym if that's okay. IP consulting. And my focus there, since I'm not a lawyer and I'm not an engineer, is on the business side of intellectual property, doing valuation strategy. And that's been my journey since then. I've moved through a few consulting firms, and I've also done some startup work. I'm very entrepreneurial. So I've been a co-founder of a couple of startups in Silicon Valley. I've also been an advisor to many, many startups. And then I started my own company around 12 years ago, focusing on intellectual property valuation and strategy, with a focus on a lot of startup focus as well as large company focus, but focus on transactions involving IP for monetization and strategy.
So the difference between IP and, say, evaluating real estate is pretty dramatic, and it certainly has changed, I'm sure, a lot over the last 12 years. So maybe you could talk a little bit about that.
That's a very good question. And so we're talking about the world of tangible assets versus the world of intangible assets. And that is kind of the first thing that I do. I teach at Stanford at the Graduate School of Business. I teach MBA students about valuing IP. So the first thing that I do is explain the difference between valuing tangible and intangible assets. There's a few differences. I would say we can divide it into three categories. One is the assets, tangible assets show on the books on the balance sheet. Intangible assets don't show on the books unless you paid for them in an acquisition. Some of the listeners may know that, but a lot of people don't know that. And since intangible assets account for more and more of the value of especially technology companies, there's an accounting gap. So there's a real need to value IP because it's not on the books. The other difference is in the, I would say, the valuation scenario. For tangible assets, there's usually one use. So if you have a building, you can rent it to one tenant at a time. When you have intellectual property, you can rent it, or we call it license. You can license it to multiple people at the time, as well as, or companies, as well as you can use it internally in your own products. So there's multiple revenue streams involved with intangible assets because it's intangible. You can use it many times over, obviously with the right caveats, but that is one main difference between tangible and intangible valuation. Lastly, I would say, as an IP valuation expert, there is the transactions are tangible, especially real estate transactions, are very public. You have databases, you can go query, you can find comparables much more easily. So the valuation is more sophisticated, is more accurate this way, right? When it comes to intangible assets, the transactions are not publicly reported. There, a lot of times, there's no requirement to report, let's say, a license agreement or sale of a technology involving IP. So when you're looking for a royalty rate, for example, you have to go to special databases that have only things that have been publicly disclosed, and it's a very random list. So if you want to value, if you want to have a property, you have bedrooms, you have a zip code, you have all these metrics that help you put a range of value on real estate. When it comes to intangible assets, that's not the case. So you have to be a little more creative. You have to use approaches that don't always rely on multiples, on comparables, because you don't have good comparables usually. So I would say those are the differences.
So in real estate, we sometimes say that, the only real value is what somebody will pay for it. So I'm sure that IP is somewhat similar in that regard. If you're not,
yes, very similar in that regard. Yeah.
Yeah. What will somebody really pay for this? And certainly coming up with comparables in the IP world sounds like a very difficult process. I'm sure you get evaluations that swing quite largely between one party to another. So, and that can happen in real estate also.
Right. It's very contextual. I would probably even say even more in intangible or IP valuations. We say the saying goes exactly like you said it. It's what somebody would pay for it, or the value is in the eye of the beholder is very true. Intangible assets are very, very unique. Also, a patent, if you think about a patent, might have a zero value to one company and incredible value to another company, because patents have all sorts of strategic values. Sometimes you want to have something that your competitor doesn't have, even if you don't generate any revenue from it. So I've seen in many cases that I've worked on, that one company wants to sell a few patents and they have no use for it, but somebody else really, really needs it. And all of a sudden the value jumps from zero to something in the millions, right? And that can happen. And those kind of fluctuations, I don't think you see as much in real estate, but I'm not a real estate expert. So you may have your own examples.
There is a very similar example in that if some particular buyer sees or has a particular use, for example, there might be a company across the street that wants that particular property to expand to, and so they want that property. Or for example, if you're developing a site and some owner wants to hold out and not let the whole block be developed, that will change the valuation or the amount that the developer potentially would pay. And I'm sure you've seen cases where someone will say, well, it's worth this much, and the buyer says, well, forget it, that's way too high, I'm not about to pay that much. So it's all there is sort of a similarity here in terms of supply and demand, how that all goes together. But and so technology, I assume, has, as you say, you've been able to find certain databases that will give you certain comparables. And I suspect that technology has changed over the last 12 years substantially in terms of making evaluation. It certainly has in the real estate world, and I assume it has in the IP world.
So in the IP world, there's a lot of factors that impact the price of IP assets, and a lot of them have sometimes nothing to do with the economy and a lot to do with other factors like the legal climate, the court system. These are legal assets. So patents have their ups and downs depending on many, many factors that have to do with litigation, with Supreme Court decisions. So it's an industry that fluctuates a lot. And I'm just talking about the market for patents, not the market for technology in general. That's a different story. But if you're just looking at patents, which there is a vibrant market for patents, but it really fluctuates a lot with with the legal and judicial climate at the moment. So putting that aside, technology, so acquisitions driven by technology, of which intellectual property is a component, definitely, I mean, we're definitely seeing increases in multiples across the in valuation multiples across the board over time, and a lot of that has to, and anything driven by intellectual property is usually driven by some void or some gap that a buyer has. That is talking about a larger company buying a smaller company, let's say a startup or something like that. A lot of times you find buyers in certain industries, not true for every industry, but in certain industries through by filling a gap in a technology that the buyer needs, and they cannot innovate fast enough as a startup can. So you can develop intellectual property in this way. You can either license or you can sell yourself to a buyer this way.
Yeah, no, I'd say it's, I mean, in some ways it's analogous a little bit to the whole sports industry, in that you will buy a player based on the hope that they will play very well for your team. And sometimes that works out and sometimes it doesn't. And I suspect intellectual property is a little bit similar that way.
Yeah, so there's two ways intellectual property, and let's go back to patents, because that's the easiest thing for people to understand, can bring value. And one is forward looking, which I think is kind of what you described. So a new technology that you hope the market would adopt. And a lot of these technologies are the kind of things that a startup would develop or a university would develop and license out to the industry for future development. The other type of value is more backwards looking, and that would be the whole issue of enforcement and infringement. So if you have patents that are heavily infringed, those are usually older patents, you can make money of an industry that already exists, but is infringing on your patent. And you can go and enforce, we call it enforcement, and make sure companies are paying their fair share of using your technology. That is a process that takes a lot of time, is very risky and very expensive. But that is a business model that you see a lot of companies engaging in, and being successful sometimes, unsuccessful some other times. Yeah.
Yeah. So I think what you're saying is that one way of evaluating the company is based on kind of their past track record and how much revenue they have generated in the past, and the other form of evaluation is basically saying, well, we're not quite sure what this patent will produce, but we think it's going to produce this much for a particular, a company might buy it, kind of speculating that it's going to do wonders for them in the future.
Kind of. So let me make sure I refine that. So one scenario is hoping the patent will make something for you in the future, and that's a future looking. And it either can be you doing it, or you can license it to other people. Like in the world of life sciences, biotech, pharma, you see a lot of smaller companies selling technology, or that's the most common exit, would be to be acquired by a larger company, because the resources involved in commercializing are so huge that a startup usually does not have that. Now, as far as the other types of value, there are two. Okay, there is the one where you already make it, a product based on your IP, in which case we call that a relief from royalty. So the value to you is not having to pay a royalty to a third party. So owning your own IP gives you a monetary value, is not to mention a strategic value by creating a moat around your technology. The other value I was talking about is outwards facing. So it's other companies that are already making products that are using your patents without your permission. Oh. That is the situation we call infringement. Yeah.
Oh, right.
So yes. And if you have in an established industry, if you have patents, the thing with patents is the older they are, the better. Usually in a let's say the industry is already happening. You have something that's pretty old, you can go back a few years and you can go after companies who have been infringing on your patents and extract royalties from them. you can do it through a letter, through we call it a licensing campaign, or if they refuse, you have to go to court and initiate a litigation campaign.
Well, there was a very famous case where which you may know about, you may teach about this. Jim Wagstaff was an attorney on a case where the government of Australia actually developed the patent for Wi-Fi. Are you familiar with this case? So they developed the patent for Wi-Fi, but they didn't enforce it. And of course, AT&T and every big company in the world picked it up. And then the government of Australia had to come back and basically enforce fines and fees upon all these big companies that were using their Wi-Fi technology. So
that was probably in Australia, because the patents are jurisdictional. So if you have a U.S. patent, and maybe they have had U.S. patents, I don't know, you can go after companies in the U.S. If they had an Australian patent, they probably go after these companies in Australia. So yeah, just so we're accurate about patent litigation is there's the patent exists in the territory where it was filed and issued. So and if they didn't have a patent, I'm not familiar with that case, but if they did not have a patent, it would be a little more difficult to enforce. But maybe they had some trade secrets that were stolen from them or something like that. So
yeah, no, it was litigated in the U.S., so it was obviously
in the U.S. So they probably had the U.S. patents then,
yeah.
or international. You can go through international filing and get a U.S. patent even if you are a foreign entity.
Yeah, they actually litigated in Texas because that was the best place. Yeah.
Yeah. Well, you've hit a good point. So patent litigation is federal. It's done in federal court. So depending on the time, I would say something very general, and hopefully the IP lawyers in the room are not going to be. You kind of have your pick. You have your pick of the venue, and Texas, Eastern, Western, both of them are very popular for various reasons. I would say the top two reasons are things are being litigated very quickly there, and they are very plaintiff. They they're pro patents and pro plaintiff, so
right.
It's easy to get a positive judgment in Texas and very quickly. And when you see large tech being sued, and if they're here in Silicon Valley, let's say, they would always like the venue to be here in Northern California District Court, but then there's ways you can shift it to Texas. So you see a lot of that being shifted to Texas, and there's a reason for that.
All the nuances of litigation.
Yeah. The litigators know that. Yeah. There you have that data. You have very, very readily available, like success rates, and by judge, by day, by venue. You can.
They're fantastic. Yeah, that's great. Well, if someone would like to get a hold of you, where would they go?
They can go to foresightvaluation.com. You can, I don't know if I can put in the chat, if they see the chat, or I can just give it.
We'll put it in the notes for the podcast itself. So that's good. Yes. So foresightvaluation.com.
Or they can look for me on LinkedIn. That's probably the easiest way. I'm very easy to find. There's only one of me. And
Efrat,
even if they Efrat,
EFRAT. So
just look at Efrat and Kasnik. If you just do KAS, which is the beginning of my last name, if you don't remember the whole thing, and you'll see me. So
well, thank you so much for taking time, and we will
thank you.
Look forward to talking to you soon.
Yeah, thank you very much, and good luck, and good luck to all the real estate people out there. Interesting times. Thank you.
Oh, yes.
Okay.
Very interesting times for evaluation in particular. So
yeah, thank you. Okay, thank you very much.
Talk to you soon.
That's a wrap on today's journey through the SF commercial real estate scene. Ready to share your story? Visit sfcommercialconversations.com/guest. Your insights could lead the next conversation.